So a very warm welcome to this week's UCL Rare-Books Club. And today is rather exciting because we're going to be hearing from some of the book and archive collectors of the future. My name is Tabitha Tuckett and I'm Rare Books Librarian at University College London. And we're going to be hearing from Jessie Maier, who is an MA student in Middle Eastern Studies at SOAS here in the University of London, and then from Hannah Swan, and she has just completed a PG diploma in Archives and Records Management at University College London. And they are both two of the 4 finalists from this year's Anthony Davis book collecting competition. It's Hannah who was the winner of the prize, but it's always very hard to choose just one winner. So we have 4 finalists, and we heard from 2 of them a couple of weeks ago in this series, and they were presenting their collections in person on campus in central London. And today we have the other 2 who are presenting online. Now, the Anthony Davis Book Collecting Prize is currently being administered from University College London's Special Collections, but it's open to students from any London-based university. So the 2 people we're going to hear from before have achieved something really very significant because they were up against applications from students right the way across London. We had students from all sorts of different colleges and universities at higher education level: Royal College of Art, Royal Holloway, King's College London, UCL of course, SOAS, and so on. The prize was set up a few years ago by Anthony Davis, and we're going to hear from him in just a few minutes. He's going to say a few words himself. But before we do that, I just wanted to let you know a little bit more about what's asked for in the prize. So I'm going to read out a very nice statement about the things that the judges were looking for. The intention in this competition is to encourage collecting, and we expect that the applicants' collections will be embryonic, so their size, their age and value are irrelevant. What is much more important is the enthusiasm and commitment of the collector, the interest of the theme, and the vision of how the collection will be developed. So it's on that basis that the applicants were shortlisted, and we ended up with 4 finalists, and then they presented their collections to a panel of judges, and that included representatives from the UK's Bibliographical Society, from the UK's Association of Antiquarian Booksellers, and also representative from Senate House Library, which is the central library for the whole of the University of London. And they had an opportunity to really discuss their collecting and ask all sorts of questions of Anthony Davis himself. He's a wonderful collector and encourager and enthusiastic person. Couldn't really imagine anyone better to instill that excitement about collecting in the students. So I'm going to call on Anthony Davis now. Anthony, I wonder if you'd like to say a few words about the competition.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can. That's perfect.
That's marvelous. Right. Well, that was a hugely embarrassing introduction, Tabitha. Yes. First of all, thank you all very much indeed for coming and watching in August on a very, very hot day. Maybe it's cooler inside wherever you are than it would be otherwise, but it's marvelous to have really quite a few people come to listen, and I'm sure you've come to hear more from Jessie and Hannah than you have for me. I'd just like to really underline a couple of things that Tabitha has said. We've been doing this prize in London now, holding it for I think it's 7 or 8 years. We're not the first. The Americans started the idea, as is so often the case, not long after the Second World War. And Cambridge were the first university in the UK to introduce one. about 10 or 11 years ago. But we thought it was time that Oxford and London did it 7 or 8 years ago. And so we started prizes there and here. And it is very, it's been a hugely exciting and enjoyable experience for all the judges, I can tell you, because it is really very moving and inspiring for us to see so many people come along with their collections to talk to us, writing their essays, and explaining to us about their own passions, because everybody on the judging panels, and I hope a lot of you here too, are people who have got this bug about books and find books and other printed material fascinating, and want to get involved with it. And what has been most exciting is seeing the different ways in which people use their imaginations to put together what are often very, very inexpensive collections of what can be very exciting material when it's put together. And you'll see that in both these examples that we'll see today. Hannah, who is the winner with great exuberance, has a very jolly, a particularly jolly subject for us to hear about. But I would like to encourage people, if any of you are thinking about whether or not your collections are eligible for a prize like this, or the collection which you're trying to build up, because that's what it's about most of all, please do get in touch with Tabitha. The rules are very, very meant to be very loose, so that anybody who has got an interest and a small collection of printed material of any kind, it can also be manuscript material which falls within the definitions, is eligible to put themselves forward. And you may find it an interesting experience just to reflect. Gives an opportunity to reflect on your own collecting, and what it is that interests you, and why you buy what you buy. It may not actually be somebody who buys. We had one of the runners up last year is a man who collects a material that is given away. And some of the most exciting collections in the prizes internationally have been collections of printed or reproduced material which have been literally picked up for nothing, that reflect historic events or important social events. And that's the kind of stuff which is going to be hugely important for future generations. And it's the kind of thing which the library should be encouraged to focus on. So that's another good reason for doing it. Anyway, you've heard more than enough of me, and I can't wait to hear a little bit more about these two collections that we're going to hear now.
Thank you so much, Anthony. It's very helpful. Right, so we have now, we're going to start with Jessie Maier, MA Middle Eastern Studies at SOAS, the School of African Oriental Studies, and Jessie's collection is entitled The Reclamation of Arab Narratives in Science Fiction and Graphic Novels. So over to you, Jessie. Let me just get you up on the screen there. Super. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. I have some slides. All right, here we are. So as Tabitha so kindly said, my name is Jessie Maier, and I'm here to talk to you today a little bit about my collection of Arab science fiction and graphic novels. So this is a collection that really morphed out of a course that I took on Arab science fiction in my undergraduate degree program, and it's just kind of spiraled from there. So this collection is very near and dear to my heart. I'm originally from the New York area, and because I was born just before 9/11, I grew up surrounded by narratives that were written and told by Americans about the Arab world. The voices of Western media personalities often replaced and erased Arab voices in discussions of their faiths, cultures, and geopolitical struggles. So my collection of Arab science fiction and graphic novels is a reclamation of these narratives And it contains voices that are absolutely invaluable in the US, but also in the greater global north, UK included. So moving forward. All right, so first I would really like to show you some of my works of science fiction. We're going to look at two of them. The first one being Palestine Plus 100. So this particular work is an American first edition. It's in very pristine condition, which I'm quite pleased with. And it's a collection of short stories written by Palestinian authors, imagining Palestine 100 years in the future. So while most media on Palestine tends to focus on its rapid erasure and potential disappearance from the map, Palestine Plus 100 highlights the hopes and fears of Palestinian authors for the future of their country. And what I find to be so cool about this particular work is it's really using the genre of science fiction, which is so frequently a tool for picturing and depicting the future, to, create a series of short stories that are in some ways very daring, trying to picture and depict a Palestine that exists and is thriving and has different issues, perhaps even 100 years in the future when present Palestine is rapidly being erased. So next, I'd like to show you perhaps my favorite work in this particular collection, Frankenstein in Baghdad. It has, some wear and tear on the bottom corners and, on the spine of the front and back cover, but otherwise it's also in very good condition. Frankenstein in Baghdad reinvents a seminal work of science fiction, story of Frankenstein, into a satirical vigilante story. The Frankenstein's monster of the story, called the What's Its Name, is a plot tool to restore humanity to the dead of Baghdad, to give them justice and names. And this contrasts heavily with the death tolls you may hear in the news after a bombing in Iraq, which tends to reduce the dead to nameless numbers. And one of the things I really love about this work is its cover art. You can really, it really evokes the depiction of Frankenstein's monster, with the lips and the eyes, the pieces that form him. So I think it's a very cool work and very creative. So now I'd like to take a look at a few of the graphic novels in my collection. As you can see, I have quite a few. So let's dive right in, shall we? So the first one I'd really love to look at is I Remember Beirut. This particular work, I would say, is also in good condition, though it has some puckering on the back bottom corner, and there's a little bit of damage to the spine on the top and bottom, though it's very hard to see the spine in this picture, unfortunately. It's quite skinny. So this particular work is drawn and authored by Zena Abrakhad. It tells the story of her childhood in Beirut during the Lebanese Civil War. And it really goes into so much of what is missing in descriptions of conflict from the media. You do not really see descriptions of what everyday life is like in a war zone. And what I love about this work is it actually focuses itself on what the everyday was like for a child, walking to school through the war zone and just going through life, balancing growing up with, the backdrop of conflict. So here we get to look at some of the really cool graphic images from within the book. It's really gorgeously drawn. I'm in love with the artwork. So we get to see the main character dancing with her younger sibling just in front of the television, normal things that children get to do. And, also we get to see her brother going around collecting shrapnel anywhere he can find it from the neighbors. Some kids live near the seashore and get to collect seashells, but because of the context of where they live, shrapnel is the thing that he's picking up from the ground to make a little collection out of. And in this particular set of pages, we get, the childhood adventure of learning how to build a paper ship juxtaposed with the main character's journey as a refugee from Lebanon to Cyprus. by boat. So this next work we're going to look at is also by the same author and illustrator. And it's not in quite as good condition, unfortunately. This is a former library copy. So it has, some stickers on the spine, front and back, but the pages have no drawing in them, and all of the beautiful artwork is completely intact. So A Game for Swallows is taking a slightly different approach from I Remember Beirut. It explores the anxiety of waiting through a round of bombings to find out whether your loved ones will return home safely. And it really uses the art in its pages to beautifully illustrate the uncomfortable emptiness and silence in that waiting. So here we can kind of see, the pauses in the phone call, the awkward silence in the room where the clock is doing its tick-tock sound, but no one's really speaking. They're sitting there waiting, smoking, their stomachs are grumbling. But the big question is, will the main character's mother return home now that a bombing raid has begun during her commute back from their grandmother's house? So it's a bit of an anxious waiting game. And here we can see, a little bit of the awkward conversation being made in the living room as they're waiting. And I think the kind of black backdrop that the illustrator has created here as the characters are talking really highlights, the awkward and uncomfortable silence and subtle anxiety in the room. And, you also get the kind of reassurance here that we're all safe here from one of the main characters. And then the kind of awkward silence that proceeds where everyone's wondering, are we safe right now? So now we're going to look at my collection of the Arab of the Future series, which I now have in both English and in French. The English version is the US edition published by Metropolitan Books. And what I particularly love about juxtaposing these two versions is how much more money was clearly put into the French version than the American publication. Don't know if the American booksellers were concerned about potential sales and didn't think they'd recoup their funds, but clearly the French version had a lot more put into it. You can see here, looking at the Arab of the Future book 4, which is at the top of this stack, both the French version and the English version. The French version is significantly thicker. And I've looked through both of these versions, and it seems that the stories are exactly the same, but it's actually the quality of the paper that is what makes the book so much thicker. And you can see also in the second picture here, just the pages side by side, and the French version is using much, much higher quality paper to print the art on. So now I thought it would be fun to just look at the same page in the French version and in the English version. Unfortunately, I don't speak French, so I can't tell you very much about differences in the exact style of storytelling here, but the images are very much the same, other than, slightly bigger text boxes here and there for the French or the English if the sentence needs to be longer where it's translated. But still a very cool thing to look at. So what I love so much about these works is they're detailing Riyad Sattouf, the author's childhood growing up in Syria during dictatorship. And, you hear a lot about the propaganda innate in dictatorship in the media, but you don't really understand what it's like to live through that. And particularly for children, I think it's important to look at their perspective in these matters, because they're often the target of this propaganda. They're the future of the country. So much of it is targeted at them. And this particular set of works really deals with that. And it shows, Riyad Sattouf's little ruler that he gets with his backpack that has Hafiz al-Assad waving on it. And it also shows him, singing the national anthem in school. And at another point, he actually gets to meet the bodyguard of Assad, which is a very interesting little scene where the father is clearly super anxious because he understands the implications of this meeting and the potential dangers that could come of it. But then, the innocent child, Riyadh, like, I don't know, is the leader of our country a good Muslim? And we also have Riyadh asking if his friends have ever heard of Saudi Arabia, which is kind of just a fun excerpt that I wanted to include here from this particular work. So last but not least, I wanted to look at a slightly different work, which is Jerusalem by Boaz Yakin. Now, this work is the only fictional graphic novel in my collection. However, it is based on the kind of family story of Boaz Yakin, very loosely, but on his origins and family story. So this particular work is in fairly good condition. It has the dust jacket, which I'm particularly pleased about, although there's some damage to the very top and bottom of the dust jacket, particularly on the front side of the dust jacket. You can see it in the upper left-hand corner. But all in all the artwork is intact and it's in fairly good condition. So this particular work details the story of 3 generations of a Syrian Jewish family in Jerusalem. And the lived reality of Arab Jews during the Israel-Palestine conflict can so often be erased in the media because this conflict is typically portrayed as Arab versus Jew. And so for Arab Jews, this becomes a situation where their stories aren't seen and the complexities of their stories that often aren't so black and white. This particular work looks at kind of the aftermath of the founding of the State of Israel and the years prior. And you have an Arab Jewish family moving to this area and finding that in some ways they have more in common with their Arab neighbors than with the Ashkenazi Jews that they're supposedly forming a state with, which is very interesting to look at. So here we have, the young boy kind of fighting an Ashkenazi Jewish boy, and there's clearly this very racially charged animosity between the young Arab Jewish boy and the Ashkenazi Jewish boy. And then for one of the older brothers in this particular family, he becomes a communist, and he's very involved in, the communist movement with Arabs and with other, but Ashkenazi Jews. And so after the British leave, there's kind of this fallout within the communist movement. And he's basically asking these Ashkenazi Jews, where are the Arabs? We're comrades. And the Ashkenazi Jews in the communist movement are like, they're gone and we're going to try to join up and fight them, essentially. So you kind of see the awkward position he's put in. And then here we have one of the other boys in this family putting up posters for the State of Israel with an Ashkenazi Jewish girl who clearly doesn't like him very much. She's like, oh, great, we have schoolboys like you for freedom fighters. So that's not going well for him. And then in the next frame, we have a Syrian Jewish man walking past Orthodox Ashkenazi men in the marketplace screaming that Shabbos is coming. And you kind of get the sense that these men are practicing in a very different way from him. He's got much more secular clothes on. He's just going about his evening as, you can, and so what I really love about this is you can really see the difference between the two, despite their shared Jewish identity. So I'd really like to thank you all for learning a little bit about my collection today and listening. I hope that you learned something and maybe you have a few books now that you're interested in picking up and learning more about.
Thank you so much, Jessie. That was wonderful. It's lovely to have those images so that we can get some idea of the artwork inside the books in your collection, and the nuances of the way that the different parties in these conflicts are presented, which is something we need all the more at the moment. So that's absolutely fantastic. We'll have an opportunity for questions at the end. But Jessie, we're going to move on now to Hannah, and then we'll get you both back after Hannah's presentation for some questions. So I'm going to bring Hannah up on the screen here. And I'd like to give Hannah a particularly warm welcome because it's, as I understand it, about 5 o'clock in the morning for you, isn't it?
Yes.
So we're really, really grateful that you've joined us, and a very different collection that Hannah's going to present. Hannah has called her collection Swizzle and Serve, and I think you'll find out why in a minute. So we move from a very, very relevant subject of cultural and racial conflict to something a lot more light-hearted. I think that's probably fair to say. I'll hand over at this point to Hannah, who can put this far better than I can. Over to you, Hannah.
Sure. Thank you, Tabitha. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And that should... Are you able to see my presentation?
That looks great. If you want to put it into presenter mode, you can, but it's fine as it is.
There we go.
Perfect.
Cool. All right. So yes, as Tabitha said, good morning all, although I know it's afternoon for most of you. So as Tabitha said, my name is Hannah Swan, and I just finished up a diploma in Archives and Records Management at UCL. So I am presenting from Seattle, and before I begin my presentation, I just wanted to take a moment to honor the Duwamish, the first people of Seattle, and to acknowledge that I'm presenting from the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people, stewarded by the Duwamish, Suquamish, Stillaguamish, and Muckleshoot people since time immemorial. I also want to take this moment to thank Anthony Davis and the rest of the prize committee again. Being part of the antiquarian book community and the ephemera community has really brought a sense of belonging into my life, and to be recognized by that community for my collecting, is a real honor. So thank you again to the committee, to Tabitha for encouraging me and my historical bibliography classmates to apply, and of course to Anthony Davis for funding the prize and for fostering young collectors such as myself. So looking ahead through my presentation, I'm going to begin with an overview of my collecting practice and then move into a closer look at my collection, really guided by my collecting priorities and selection criteria. I don't have a ton of time, and I'm going to try to cram in as much as possible. So if there are any items that you'd like to know more about, definitely just go ahead and make a note, any bibliographic information. Jessie and I will be taking questions at the end, and I can answer those then. So I am an admittedly rapacious collector. So my party planning literature is actually just one of several collections that I maintain, though it really is at the heart of my collecting. So my first real collection was stickers, which I somewhat embarrassingly still avidly collect. I also collect liquor and gelatin advertising ephemera, little cookbooks, mid-century erotica and pornography, and a vast array of other funny, bizarre printed material that I enjoy. But today, obviously, I am focusing in on my collection of party planning books and ephemera, part of which you'll see here on the screen. So I limit my collecting to pre-1980 materials with a focus on the American mid-century period. And party planning can be a pretty nebulous category, so I generally define it by the inclusion of at least one non-recipe party idea. I don't generally collect material from parties that were actually given, so things like menus, filled out invitations, or party photographs. And I also don't generally collect materials related to specific holidays or events. So things like showers, weddings, Christmas parties don't really fall under my remit. And I say this, but of course there are, many exceptions to all these criteria to be found in my collection. But the whole thing really sprung from my interest in cookery books and ephemera. I actually ended up writing my dissertation for my MSc in book history at the University of Edinburgh about class, gender, and sexuality in 1970s party planning books. That project and the research around it inspired me to collect more voraciously, leading to the collection I have now of about 100 pieces of ephemera and about 30 books related to parties and party planning. As far as how I collect, I really collect everywhere I go. So my materials have been sourced from the internet, from charity, antique, and thrift shops, and at book and ephemera fairs. Many have also been given as gifts. My family and friends know me well. And I've also gotten some for free from little libraries in my neighborhood and in exchanges with other collectors. So I thought it would be helpful to begin with the practicalities of managing a collection such as mine. So as you can see, I felt it was necessary to catalog my collection, and the most efficient and economical option was just a basic spreadsheet. So as you can see, I have 9 headings that I use to catalog, and this includes product advertised, which is non-standard as far as rare book cataloging, but which I use because so many of the materials I collect were published as promotions for different brands. I've ordered everything here in line with rare book cataloging, so it's actually super easy for me to export these and then reformat them into essentially Chicago style citations for a rare book catalog record, which is what I did for the bibliography for this prize. So once I have the materials cataloged, I sleeve smaller items in archival grade sheet protectors, just a basic one off the internet, and then file them in these file boxes that I have for my ephemera and magazine collections. The books generally go straight on my shelf. I actually don't have any photos of my collection thus arranged because I am also in the middle of moving right now. So pretty much everything I own is boxed. And I also have 2 larger boxes for oversized material, but I'm too embarrassed to show it today because one of them is this beat up old cardboard box and it doesn't look as nice as these. So now on to the fun bit. And again, my goal throughout this presentation is going to be to show off as many items as possible. So if you have more in-depth questions about any specific item, please do just keep them in mind or pop them in the chat and I'll answer them at the end. So I'm going to begin with a look at some of the sub-collections that have formed both consciously and organically within my larger collection. So a unifying theme in my collection, and really what was the nexus of the whole thing, is advertising, promotions, and magazine publications. So as I mentioned, I wrote my dissertation on 1970s party planning books, and I focused on those published by men's and women's magazines. So namely Playboy and Cosmopolitan. So Playboy's Host and Bar book here on the left really played a large role in that research project. And so here I have a few of my magazine party books, as well as selections for my advertising ephemera. The one here on the right in the front is a promotion for Philadelphia cream cheese, and the 2 in the back are both for Taylor wines. I also have a particular interest in materials that reveal something about cultures of gender and sexuality. Because party planning materials are fundamentally didactic, they have strong connections to what's known as middle brow culture. So these materials essentially aim to teach this, burgeoning middle class that emerges in the post-war period about how to be sophisticated. So in other words, how do you gain social prestige? And so the materials are super aspirational. They're really centered on conformity within the given culture. And in this way, we can use them to kind of reverse read what is the dominant culture's values? What are the ideologies that are coming out? And so a lot of the ideology is heavily gendered. So prescribing who does what, who's in charge of what a good hostess does, what a good host does. And additionally, as cocktail culture gains traction, and most importantly, as women begin to be included in that culture, parties also become a really sexualized space. So for unmarried, or as we'll see, married people to mingle, flirt, and pick each other up. So I could have really easily put pretty much any item in my collection to this slide because, again, these materials are heavily gendered, very much geared either towards women or towards men. But I chose these representative 3. So on the left, we have one of the most interesting and actually rarest items in my collection. So this is a book of party games intended to be played at a swingers party. And the keyhole on the front is reference to so-called key parties, where guests would put their keys in a bowl, fish out a different set, and then go home with whoever's keys they pulled. So as you can see, the games skew very naughty, including these instructions for a good old-fashioned game of group strip poker. And in the middle is VIP Tosses a Party, which is a book from Virgil Parch, and also has that kind of saucy 1960s flair. So Virgil Parch signed all of his work of VIP, which has the name. And he illustrated cartoons in the New Yorker and had a few syndicated comic strips in the 1970s. And as you can see, his book includes the perfect female and perfect male guests, among other very highly gendered cartoons throughout the book. And then finally, over here on the bottom right, I included one of my Amy Vanderbilt's Success Program for Women booklets. So this was a whole series that, again, focused on how you can be like a Vanderbilt, how you can be sophisticated, on a budget. And so I have actually probably about 4 or 5 of these in my collection, again, tying back to that idea of aspirational middlebrow culture. So I also have an interest in female illustrators and book designers, and most of my materials in this area actually don't fall under party planning. They are generally contained in my other collections, but I do have 2 examples here. So on the left is the work of Laura Jean Allen, who was a really famous illustrator and fabric designer. So she designed several New Yorker covers, obviously designed the Esquire's Handbook for Hosts. And interestingly, I actually had already begun a small collection of her work when I bought this and did not know that she had done the illustrations, and just happened to be a happy coincidence. And another interesting thing is that for this work, she actually signed it L.J. Allen. So I think probably to not give away that she was a woman. And then on the right, we have an earlier item, the Canopé book. And this one was actually both written and designed by women. And Lucina Smith Wakefield, seen here on the bottom right, was the illustrator and designer. So similarly to my interest related to gender and sexuality, I have a substantial subcollection of teenage party books. And this again is interesting to me, taken from this didactic point of view, as these books are really meant to induct young women, for the most part, into these really gendered rituals of adulthood and teach her how to be a good hostess, what's expected of her once she becomes essentially a housewife. And, they often make mention of mimicking their parents. And I just had to include the intro to Tips for Teens from Carnation here in the bottom right-hand corner. Just cracked me up. Parents, are they really just antique adults? You tell me. So this again ties back into gender and sexuality. So while party planning materials were overwhelmingly directed towards women, outdoor parties and barbecue planning materials were generally directed at men. So the language used tends to be very different, so much more masculine, even with these explicit mentions of women's domain in the house and man's domain outside. I have one that begins with a history of barbecue, and it's got this caveman bringing home the big mammoth leg, and all kinds of very gendered language. And the other thing is that it also really ties into the entertaining culture of the period. So obviously during the post-war era in America, you have the rise of the suburb. and the idea that everyone has their backyard in which to entertain their neighbors in suburbia. So as such, things like grilling and patio parties start to take on a much more important role in party giving. And this also ties into what some call the looseness, as in get loose, of the 1960s and 70s culture. So you have a much more informal, casual, entertaining style that's moving away from traditional formal dinners and towards, for one example, food prep as being part of the entertaining. So we can think about barbecue and fondue as both being phenomena of this period. And also just a more informal setting. So we're moving away from the formal dining room, from everyone dressing for dinner, and more, guys in their shorts sitting on the back porch eating steak. So now that I've gone through some of my areas of interest, I want to move through how I actually select the materials for my collection. So first, and if I'm being honest, most importantly to me is the visual appeal. That's what really drew me to these materials in the first place. I really love the showmanship of the parties. So it's not just a couple bags of crisps and some red cups on a table. It's, effort and time spent to really bring guests into these essentially visual fantasies that are created by the host and hostess. So I'm especially drawn to quote unquote tablescapes. So essentially how a table is laid, centerpieces, how food is laid out to make it most visually appealing to guests, and how that really does change over time. And so that's what drew me to this booklet second from the right, all about tables and how to set them, which was written by Nancy Prentice. And I actually have two booklets by her. She worked for the Westmoreland Sterling Silver Company in the 1940s. And so wrote a couple different books for them about setting the table properly. Similarly, in a very kind of different era, we have this buffet of the future from the Better Homes and Gardens Guide to Entertaining that you can see here on the bottom. And, this would have been a really mass market book. So it gives a sense of what the dominant culture was as far as entertaining and decorating. And I just love all the 1960s decorating ideas, this one in particular. And I'm also a big fan of the early 20th century color illustrated booklets. So Good Luck Color Scheme Parties here on the right is a good example. And this is actually an advertising booklet for Good Luck Margarine, containing parties that are centered on a color theme. So all the decorations and place settings and food would be one color, excepting this one here, which is actually for a rainbow party, but I thought was pretty fun. And funnily enough, I actually have, so this is from the 20s, I believe. And I also have a 1960s booklet advertising Laura Scudder's chips, or crisps for my British audience, that has the same theme. So hers are color moods, but it's similarly a series of color themed parties. And then finally on the left is toasts, which is one of the oldest items in my collection. So this is from 1907. And as the name suggests, it's a series of drinking toasts illustrated by Claire Victor Dwiggins, and Claire here being a man's name. And the illustrations are just gorgeous, very, early 20th century. And I love the typesetting as well. Like, it's really inventive. As you can see here, I'm thinking that this one maybe is supposed to be mimicking a kind of meandering drunken toast with the typesetting. So next, I do eventually intend for this to become a research collection. So I do try to think about representative items. So things like books and materials that were really popular, mass market, especially things that went into multiple editions, giving a good sense that they were, an important part of the culture. So on the left, we have two Betty Crocker books selected for her obvious supremacy in American middle-class cooking. And then here in the center, I have what's actually a Tupperware catalog, but also documents the phenomenon of the Tupperware party, which is a real cultural touchstone, at least in America. And again, I think it's also interesting to think about these from a, cultural and historical standpoint, to think about what moments in time are we seeing represented. So the pamphlet second from the right was published by the Hawaii Visitors Bureau. It's undated, but I would estimate 1950s probably. And the Patricia Collier booklet on the right was published by the Dole Pineapple Company, who, as you may know, played a key role in the annexation of Hawaii for the United States. And this was also published around the same time in the 50s. And for those of you who don't know, Hawaii became a state in 1959. So even though these might seem relatively innocuous, they're, really these vehicles for soft power that helped write Hawaii into the American imagination, and thus ultimately helped justify the colonization of this sovereign state. So I'm also really keen on unique off-the-wall material types. So I love all the kinds of fringe print materials that, definitely wouldn't fit on a library shelf, but really function within the same party planning remit. So on both the left and the right, we have drink identifiers. So the ones on the left were a gift from my dad a few years ago, and they're very similar to wine charms that you see now, just a lot kitschier. So they're supposed to tell people what you're drinking so that they can easily refill your drink without you having to ask. And so they make an interesting bit of, cultural history, because we can see what the company thought the most popular party drinks would be. So it's a couple different combinations using bourbon or scotch, rum and coke, martinis, and then my favorite, which is who cares? Put whatever you want in there. And then similarly, on the right is Identi-Drink. So that's a series of drink identification stickers. So you write in both your name and what you're drinking next to these bizarre and funny little cartoons. And supposedly they're also supposed to act as name tags, but I'm not, I don't know, I'm skeptical. I just think it's weird to be kind of peering at someone's drink to see what their name is rather than just ask them, but to each their own. And in the bottom right-hand corner is a set of cocktail napkins that I actually received as my going away present when I left my last job to move to London. And they're especially fun because each one has a different little plastic accoutrement that's glued into the illustration. So this one, for example, is a little clock face. And in the middle on the bottom, I have a set of 1940s party games. And these are in completely unused condition, which is pretty rare. So you're supposed to cut out the numbers, but these have never been used. And here in the middle on the top is one of my favorite items in the collection. So this was also a gift. It was actually the only thing I asked my parents for Christmas last year. And so this is actually a 1950s party planning LP that was recorded by Gaynor and Dorothy Maddox. So Gaynor Maddox was a nationally syndicated food writer and editor who also wrote a handful of cookbooks. And Dorothy was his wife, and she also wrote food columns, though I don't think she was as widely published as he was. And so this is interesting because it's actually a really rare item. So I've never seen another one for sale. And according to WorldCat, there are only 2 copies of this held globally. So it's a really exciting addition to my collection. And finally, humor. So, I really love these party planning materials because they really represent, again, this just weird, absurd, bizarre fringe of mid-century print. And I just find it fascinating. And, a lot of them sure are very straightforward. It's, birthday cakes and basic table settings, but I would say that every single item in my collection has some kind of idiosyncrasy that makes me laugh every time I see it. And that is important to me because these materials really are just things that bring me joy. So on the left here is one of my favorite weird items, which is a party planning booklet published by Toastmaster Toasters. So they spend the whole booklet really trying hard to make it seem, reasonable that you would use your toaster as the centerpiece of every kind of party imaginable. So here you can see I especially love their atomic cocktail party toaster spread, as though it's normal to be at a cocktail party making toasts for your guests. But so it's actually a reversible booklet. So the top, the party's on is one way. And then if you flip it, it's actually children's party ideas for the other half. And I have to say that this contains probably the most questionable children's activities out of any item in my collection. So this includes the party game, quote, tying up the chain gang, unquote, wherein kids tie toothpicks together with string while pretending that they are chaining prisoners together. So fun times at the Toastmaster party. Moving on, in the middle, again, we have the just absurdity of the ham candelabra, or as I like to think of it, the hamdelabra. And on the right, in the wow, that would never fly today category, party planning by Matinee Cigarettes, asserting that packs of cigarettes for your guests are the finishing touch to any party. And that takes me to the end of my presentation. So these materials bring me so much joy, and it's been, a real pleasure to share them with you. So I hope that I have inspired you all to go whip up a Jello mold and play tying up the chain gang, or at the very least, group strip poker. So thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Hannah. That's absolutely wonderful. Now, I know that some people need to go. Hannah, if you're able to just stop your screen share.
Yeah.
For those who need to go, because we've got 2 minutes till 2 o'clock, just want to say thank you very much for coming along. I've put in the chat the link if you want to find out a little bit more about Hannah and Jessie, but also about our other 2 finalists, Domenico and Margosha. And there's a little bit more information on our blog post there. And you'll also be able to find out a lot more about the competition. And as Anthony said earlier on, please do think about submitting if you'll be studying in a London university of any sort next year. I'd also like to thank Sarah Pipkin from Special Collections, who has been managing our Zoom behind the scenes today, and Bentham's Body Ensemble, who provided the music for us, especially for this series at the start. Now, for those of you who can stay, it would be wonderful to have some questions. Jessie, I don't know if you'd like to switch your camera on, or we can get you back up as well. There you go. Super. So you can put your questions and comments in the chat if you like. If you prefer, you can click the raised hand button and you will be able to switch on your audio and ask your question yourself. But I'll start for now. I just wanted to know from Jessie and from Hannah what you were thinking of adding next to your collection, where you thought you might go with this next. Jessie?
Oh, that's a very good question. So there's a book by Emil Habibi called The Pesto Optimist, and it's a work of Arab science fiction from the 1980s that's fairly well known, even just in Arab literary circles. And that would be a very cool addition, just because it predates a lot of the pieces that I have. And it's a really cool work.
Lovely, that's great. Hannah?
Sure. So I mean, I have a whole long wish list of things to add to my collection. But a couple that I was interested in, I recently came across this really great early 20th century ice cream mold party planning booklet that I, have never seen anywhere else, isn't held in WorldCat. So that's going to be probably one. I also have been really wanting to add, again, because I do have this focus on magazine publications, and because these materials, in the mid-century period, especially with dominant culture, tends to skew very white. So Ebony magazine actually produced Date with a Dish, which is a really famous cookbook. And so I would love to add that as well to my collection. But again, part of the fun of this is also just going out and seeing what's out there and what I find. And so, yeah.
Super, thank you. Now we've got a comment in the chat from a former winner of this competition, actually, Alex Plain, and she says it's interesting to see how you both share a sociological approach to your collections, even though the contents are very different. And I agree with that. It's lovely, Jessie, to see the sense of humor in the comments of the children when the content is in many ways very tough and very bleak to handle. And Hannah, yours is almost the other way around, isn't it? It initially looks fun and humorous, but actually there were a lot of quite serious issues there. So Alex has a question for you, Jessie. How do you go about acquiring your material, and do you come across things by chance, or do you have a list of titles to search for?
I think it's a little bit of a variety, by chance or by title. I definitely found Frankenstein in Baghdad by just walking through a bookstore and seeing the title and going, oh, wait, I want that. So that's certainly one. But I also try to anticipate upcoming publications. So a lot of the same publishers will come out with these sorts of books in the United States. So sometimes I'll peruse through their website, see what's coming down the pipeline, and then, keep an eye on the date when it's coming out. So very often I'll source these books from, bookstores near me. The New York area has kind of a book row near Union Square where you can find a lot of new and used bookstores, and that's a really great place I found to source materials. But some things can be harder to get, so online is occasionally a place I'll look as well. But yeah, that's where I look for things mostly.
Yeah, that's interesting. Hannah?
Oh, sure. So yeah, so I, again, look everywhere I go. It's really, as I mentioned in my presentation, a lot of these have been gifts. My friends and family, like I said, know me well, know that I'm always looking for weird, interesting cocktail culture related things. Yeah, a lot of it is chance. There are things that I seek out. So for example, the Swingers Party booklet, that was one that I actually, did seek out on eBay, and was, kind of came across by chance and then bought online. And, so it's kind of a mixed bag for me as well.
Now, Jessie, you're looking at material that is quite likely not to be in English, and you talked a little bit about that in your presentation. Do you go about sourcing non-English language material in a different way, or is it quite similar to your methods for the English language material? Because it's interesting that what you're looking at is the way cultures are presented, specifically in how we receive and how we view and how we read those situations from an American or a European perspective.
Yeah, so specifically for the big stack of French works that I've acquired, I've really used a pretty similar strategy that I've used for a lot of the English language works to acquire them. I was in Paris, I was like, okay, what kind of store would perhaps have something like this? managed to find a book row that sold mostly Japanese manga publications, but often where there's Japanese manga, there's obscure graphic novels that they also sell. That's just a pattern I found. So naturally, they had the full collection available in French of Arab of the Future. So I was able to acquire it all at once. And they had a lot of other content too, which was really cool to see. So it is similar in general. I would say that, you know, for acquiring works in Arabic though, unless, you know, you're in a country where the work is published, it's sometimes a little harder to get a hold of it. You might have to use eBay and a few other strategies, but I'm typically more interested in works in their English or Western language versions, because I think that's where they have the most fascinating impact.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. And we have a lovely comment from Anthony Davis to say thank you both very much for the presentations. I wanted to ask you both, and I think there are other collectors in the audience, perhaps they might have comments as well. Sounds a naive question, but I think there are many different ways of answering it. Why do you collect? Hannah, I don't know if you want to go first.
I mean, that's a good question. I've pondered this myself for a long time. I think, you know, I think some of it is like innate almost in a weird way. Like I said, when I was a kid, I, you know, really collected stickers. I wouldn't let anyone use them. I was like, no, they just need to be in like my whatever. I also, in 4th grade, we had to bring in a collection for as part of class. So when I was about 8 years old, and I brought in a book collection. I was the only child in the class to bring in books. So, you know, some of it is like, I think just the way that I am, my personality. But, you know, I've always been interested in material culture and in print culture. And I, you know, grew up with parents who really encouraged that. I made a lot of my own books when I was a kid. And so I think that I got a lot of encouragement and also had some kind of personality trait that made me interested in it. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting, that, isn't it? The sort of need to put things together. Jessie, what would you say? It's a difficult question. Perhaps I'm putting you on the spot.
I think for me personally, I find that I have a tendency to go down different rabbit holes when I'm really inspired by something. And I think collection is not the goal, but the byproduct in a lot of ways. You know, eventually the collection comes about and you kind of realize you've been doing something all along. So I would say that's really why I collect. I get a really solid interest in something. I'm very fascinated by it. I'm invested in it for several different reasons. And then, you know, a couple of years down the line, suddenly I realized there's a very large stack of books and I have acquired a collection.
I think many of us have found ourselves in exactly that position. And I don't know if anybody else in our audience has anything to add. We've got Anthony himself, who's a collector, and Alex is on the call, who's a collector, and there may be others of you out there. Any comments on why you collect? We'll keep an eye open on the chat there. And meanwhile, Alex has a question for you, Hannah. Do you use your collection in your own party planning, and have you ever attempted the Hamdalabra?
So I've never attempted the Hamdalabra. That's actually a relatively new addition to my collection earlier this year, but I have a lot of plans. I think I'm definitely going to try to make that happen. Seems relatively easy. Just get some of those spear candlesticks and stick them in a ham. Get some driftless candles. But yeah, I mean, I definitely, like, you know, one of the reasons, as far as why I collect, so one of the reasons that I collect these materials is that I love to host. I love to have, you know, throw parties, especially dinner parties. as my friends can attest. And, you know, I definitely enjoy making Jell-O molds and trying out these ideas and trying out, you know, weird foods on my friends and interesting decoration ideas. And, you know, especially the kind of centerpieces and things like that, you know, it's really fun to give it a try and see what happens. And most of the time it's gross, but on occasion it's, you know, really good. So
maybe we should have made that a condition of winning the competition. You have to throw a huge party to all of us, and we have to guess the theme. Yeah.
that would be great.
So now one of the reasons why some people collect is thinking towards the future. And I wondered if either of you have thought yet, you're just starting out, but whether you've thought yet about what you'd like to happen to your collections in the future. Is this something that's very much for yourselves, a personal thing? Is it something that you want to share with others? Is it something you might want to use to help understanding of the content? Is it something you might want to leave behind? I mean, this is long in the future, we hope. I don't know if you've got any ideas, and everybody has a different answer to this. Jessie.
Yeah, I do have an answer to this question, actually. A while ago, I was watching a documentary actually on book collecting, and one of the women in it had spent her life collecting kind of dime novel books about women specifically. And she ended up donating her collection eventually to an academic library. And I think for me, that would be the most meaningful end goal. There are some academic libraries that are finally taking an interest in Arab graphic novels and in Arab science fiction. I think specifically, I think it's the American University in Beirut, Lebanon. They have specifically started acquiring Arab graphic novels and putting together a library of them. So I think as this becomes more important in the general scheme of the Middle Eastern studies field, it would be really meaningful for me, for my collection to grow enough to be acquired by an academic library.
Well, as an academic rare books librarian, I'm very happy to hear that, of course. Do you know at all how the people in the conflicts that are portrayed in your material, how they react to the fact that you're collecting these? Have you ever had the opportunity yet to have conversations?
I frankly have not. I don't think that has come up yet. But I would definitely be interested in having a conversation like that for sure.
That would be interesting. Hannah, what about the future of your collection?
Sure. So as I said in my presentation, again, I do, like Jessie, want this to be, you know, a research collection. I think that there is a lot of value, especially with ephemera, in bringing them together in aggregate and then being able to kind of look at what the, you know, print culture looks like as a whole. And so, you know, for me, for undergrad, went to Scripps College, which is a women's college in California. And they have a great domestica focus in their special collections. And it's a collection that I have a, you know, sentimental tie to as well. I spent a lot of time down in the stacks as an undergrad. And I think that it would really enrich the collections that they have. And it's a small library and a small, you know, small special collections in general. So I'm hoping that they'll have space and they'll take it. But yeah.
That's very exciting to think about the future. But for now, we're just really pleased and excited to find out more today about how far you've got already. And I think identifying that that theme, that point of that center for a collecting focus is a real skill. It's difficult to get it right, and you both very much have, as you've shown us today. Have you got any questions for anyone on the call before we finish? I think we've got Anthony here. We still have Alex playing the winner from a couple of years ago. We've got our conservator on the call. It doesn't matter if you don't, but if you do go ahead. You can always get in touch with us later. Right.
I think that, yeah, I think I complete 5 a.m. that my brain is not fully functioning yet for thinking of questions, but I'll certainly email if I think of them.
I completely understand. So I think it just remains for us to thank you both. Two fascinating and very different collections and wonderful presentations. I really appreciate you both joining us, especially the time difference for you, Hannah. And most of all, thank you to Anthony Davis for setting up this competition, and for giving you the opportunity. And thank you to all of those who applied. It's just such a shame that we can't make you all winners, but you all are winners in the sense that you've already started to think about your collections and you're already working on them. So both Hannah and Jessie and everybody else who applied, we wish you a lot of joy in the future in developing your collections. If you haven't applied before and you're studying at a London-based university next year, do think about applying in the future. But for now, thank you all very much. Thank you to Anthony, thank you Hannah, thank you Jessie. And we'll see you next week at our Rare-Books Club, which is in person, and we're looking at some of the new acquisitions at Special Collections. We'll have material by James Joyce, by George Orwell, by two early modern female writers, and we'll also have some early modern mathematical works, among other things. For now, thank you very much. Bye-bye.